Perek of Tanya. We did the Hakdama, in which we explained how the Alter Rebbe justified writing the Sefer Tanya Kedusha, why it was necessary, why we wrote it. We also introduced Chassidus, in other words, what it is that the Alter Rebbe is trying to do in terms of Avodas Hashem, Al Derech HaChassidus. And we discussed the pasuk, Yikarev elach adav me'ed b'ficha b'vav chal ha'seisei, levayit heitev eichu karev me'ed b'darach haruchu k'tzara, v'ezer Hashem Yisbarach. That's what we did most recently. So now we're ready to begin the Tanya. And I want to start the Tanya with a story. Metamaise. The story is published. I've heard the story many times. I heard the story from a Yid whose name is Rabbi Twersky, of Nachman Yosef Twersky. The story happened with his uncle, that was his father's brother, and his Zaydim, whose name was Rabbi Yechon Twersky, I think. What's the story? I think Rabbi Yechon Twersky. The story is as follows: that his uncle married the Chernobyl, Racham Sivkes Chernobyl. Skver is also Chernobyl. Chernobyl is a Chassidus which is very strong. Ad hayom hazeh. Ich habe einmal gehört, dass die Pesach sagen, als bei der Lubliner, bei der Chäuse, wenn breite Tisch, und bei der Chernobyl, wenn lange Tisch. A breite Tisch means that a lot of tzaddikim sitting around this table, and the Chernobyl is a lange Tisch, bis Mashiach. It's one of the strongest chassidus that existed after all the tzaddas, is all the Chernobyl in the Klach, Racham Strifk, and Skver, and there are others. Anyway, so he married a cousin of Skver Tachter, Einikol, and the wedding took place in America. So they came to America for the chasana. Now there's a very beautiful story that goes back to when the Friedrich Rebbe visited. It's called their Einikach for the Mittel Rebbe. They're Poshet Krevim. The Einikach for the Mittel Rebbe to Reb Nachum. I think. The Ashenis, the Rebbe went there to Israel, the Friedrich Rebbe, and he met, I think his name was Reb Menachem Nochem Tversky, the Yermot Racham Srifke Rebbe living in Yerushalayim. He was over 100 in 1929. Rushtal Zachfar. And the Friedrich Rebbe was Moidendik Nispal. The Friedrich Rebbe met a Yid from a few days before, and his Madrega of Tzidkes and Avoida was like, the times in the Tzemach Tzedek, in the world of Tzadikim Retman. And he was very, very taken by him, and he encouraged very much Chassidus on Larain to him. And there was an incredible establishment of Kiyud of Alavavis. The families became very close. This Rebbe Nachum Tversky didn't live much longer after that, and the Rebbe was very, very involved with him as long as he lived. The Rebbe wanted Anash to go to his Levaya and to participate. And then it was his son's name was Reb David, who passed away the same year as the Friedrich Rebbe, Tavshin Yud, and there was Rabbi Yechanan, who passed away Tavshin Lamed Ches. Anyway, so they came to New York, and they went to see the Rebbe. And there's a minig by Gute Yidden, by Tzadikim, by Gute Yidden, by Rebbes, that when a visitor comes to a town, so he comes to see the local Rebbe, the host. And then he returns the visit, the local comes to see him in his Achsani, where he's staying during his trip. So I heard, in the name of Rabbi Leibel Grona, that the only time in the entire Nesias of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe returned a visit to anyone, was this time. Rabbi Yechanan Racham Sifki came here for his son's chasna, his Rebbe Itzakel. So he came to see the Rebbe Yechidus, and then he went to Borough Park to see them.
What year was this?
Yudal, very beginning of the Nesias. The chassan was very young. They get married in Skver, they get married 16, not even 18. Very, very young. And he went into the Rebbe with his father, and the Rebbe asked him what he's learning. So he told the Rabbi he's learning two different Masechtas. I'm sure he had a very good head. This is the Benan Shal Kedoshim. But he was still young. And the Rabbi asked him which of the two, he told the Rabbi which two Masechtas they were. And Rabbi Twersky, when he told me the Maisa, said which Masechtas they were. I think in Shemin Sas Mechaverecha, the stories are written with all the Pirtei Pratim. Rabbi Volpa has it in his Sefer. He has a set of Sfarim about the Rebbe's relationships with Gdei Yisrael. And this story is in there. And so he told the Rebbe asked him which of the two Masechtas he's more comfortable with. So he told the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asked him a question on what he was learning. The question the Rebbe asked him was a standard question that a lot of the Rishonim ask, that there's a number of different answers to, and it was easy for him to address it. The Rebbe asked him a question, he gave the Rebbe an answer. And the Rebbe asked him a question on the answer that he gave, which he couldn't deal with. He was stuck. He hadn't thought of the question, the Mepharshim don't talk about it, and we didn't know what to say. So he didn't answer. So the Rebbe told him, this question has no answer in Nigla de Teira. There's no answer up in Nigla. And you could say it perhaps a little bit differently. In Nigla, it's not even a kasha. Nita tzach is a kasha, Like the Rebbe, you say about Rashi, in Pshutei Shal Mikra, not everything is a kasha. There are many things that to Rashi are non-issues, that in the level of Remez and Drush are big kashas. So he said, this question has no answer up in Nigla. But the answer is up Yisod, up Chassidus, up Kabbalah. And the Rebbe gave him the answer. And explained to him why the reason the Nigla is the way it is because of the Nisted, which is behind the Nigla. And the Rebbe explained to him that this is the Inyan from Teira Achas. The Rebbe said hundreds of times, probably thousands of times, the expression Teira Achas L'Kulana. So Teira Achas L'Kulana, there's three words, right? The most important word is the word L'Kulana. We all have the same Teira, Takatzvei Teiras. But it's also important, the word Achas, there's only one. Which means the idea that there's a separation between Nigla and Nisted takes away not just from the Nisted, it takes away from the Nigla. If it's not the one Teira, then it's not what it is, it's something different. And the Rebbe says, every time you encounter a question that you cannot explain up in Nigla and you must explain up in Nisted, it reveals this Achtus in Teira. And this is really a whole world. It's really a whole world. It's a ganze Welt. And it goes back to a Teira, a Maimon from Alter Rebbe, based on a Teira de Baal Shem Tov. There's a Maimon from Alter Rebbe printed in Marmak Tzadim, which is, I think, in Marmak Tzadim. It's printed for sure, based on the Teira of Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov met a Yid, a big Talmud Chacham, a big Lamdan, and the Baal Shem Tov asked him a question. So he answered him. So the Baal Shem Tov asked him a question and the answer. So he found himself defending his answer. And he got stuck. He couldn't defend his answer. So he told the Baal Shem Tov that he made a mistake. And then the Baal Shem Tov proceeded to show him that his answer was correct. And now he found himself in defending how the answer was indefensible. Verstehst? And the Baal Shem Tov showed him how the answer was correct. And he agreed that the Baal Shem Tov was correct. As soon as he agreed that the Baal Shem Tov was correct, the Baal Shem Tov again undid the ganze mais. He played with him. And the Lashon is, the Baal Shem Tov said, any question you could ask, I can answer. Any answer you can give, I can refute. And he explained. And this is what Paltiel says in the Maimir, because Teira exists in many worlds. And what is a teretz in one world becomes a kasha in a higher world. And Beklolos it's the four madregis, a pshat, remez, drush, seid. Teira, unless you have Ruach HaKodesh, unless you look at the Sefer Teira and you see Ein Sof, is learned with questions and answers. Right? For Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, for Reb Meir, they look at the Sefer Teira and they see Ein Sof. If you see Ein Sof, you have no questions, you have only answers. But for the people who are not on that madrege, Teira, the Lashon is Bereishach HaSheicha v'hodon Heira. It's black letters blocking the white, which represents the Eid of the Sefer Teira, and you only have the light through the darkness. In other words, you learn Teira through question and answer. The whole Teira was given to us by the Eibishter in a way that makes us ask questions and seek answers. And when we ask the question and we find the answer, we found the light. So there's different levels of Teira. And in general, there's four levels of Teira. Pshat, and Remez, and Drush, and Sod. What separates the four levels, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod? More than anything else, is what is a kasha. The true sign of a lamdan is not someone who knows how to answer a question. The true sign of a lamdan is someone who knows what a question is. You can ask Narish kashas and you can ask substantive kashas. And a real lamdan knows what a question is. Because Shailas Chochem is Chatzi Tshuva. When you ask a question, that question is already half an answer. And this is how Torah is learned. The more developed, the more in tune a Yid is to Torah, the more precise and the more useful and the more constructive his questions on it are. Anybody who grew up around the Rebbe would ask Rashi, 5 words, 25 questions. How do you get so many questions out of 5 words? The Rebbe managed. There's a Gewaldike Maise. I think it's a Teuchnias Dike Maise. Rabbi Yossi Soloveitchik was a Gon Adil, a Gon Oilam, right? The Rav from Yeshiva University. And the Rebbe knew him from Berlin. They had a very special relationship with Chuli. Every time Kahas printed a Sefer, he sent a copy to him. Nigla and Chassidus. He knew more Chassidus than all the Mashpiyim, you understand. It was a Gon. So, Rabbi Sheber had Shiur Mechumash Rashi. Rabbi was the consummate teacher. He was the greatest teacher of our generation, as a Rosh Yeshiva. He wasn't, in other things, he wasn't necessarily that great, but in terms of, he was the best teacher. He was a Goel Dika Malamed. And he taught a lot of the biggest Lomdim, his Talmidim. He was a very, very big Lomdim. He was a great teacher. And one of the things he taught was Chumash Rashi. So his Talmidim used to play games with him. They could talk to him, he was the Rav, but he kept him reading. He could argue with him. And they would ask him, they would learn all the Sichos on Rashi, and they'd come and ask him the Rebbe's Kashas. So they'd come to him and they would ask him a question and he would answer. They'd ask him a question and he would answer. Ask him a question. Then they would ask him a question and he would shout at him, "This is not your question. Someone gave you this one." In other words, he recognized the Rebbe not in the Teretz, in the Kasha. Because that's really there's an expression, Stam Makshin. Anybody can ask questions. Why is it Aleph and Aleph? It's a question from the Gemara, a Sipur, where someone asked one of the Talmud Amidoim, for what's an Aleph? Maybe Aleph is a Beis, maybe it's an Aleph. A question is the most sophisticated part of being a student is knowing how to ask. And in Pshat is one set of questions, and in Remez is the second set of questions, and in Drush is the third set of questions, and in Sod is the fourth set of questions, and in Chassidus there's a fifth set of questions. In other words, every level of Torah has a criteria of what's a question. And certain things are not questions, they're just not significant enough in that madreg of Torah. That's why you're going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. What is not a question in Pshat becomes a question in Remez. What's not a question in Remez becomes a question in Drush. What's not a question in Drush, and so on. So this is what the Rebbe was teaching this younger man. And there are literally hundreds of sichos, including in the Likutei Sichos, Mugadik Sichos of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe makes this precise point, this exact point, that the Torah, if you learn the sicha from the Rebbe asks a question, he gives an answer, refutes it, gives an answer, refutes it, gives an answer, 3 or 4 answers. If you look closely, these 3 or 4 answers, not just 3 or 4 tries, they're 3 or 4 worlds. What is Pshat? And on Pshat, it's a good teretz. Then the Rebbe challenges it and gives you a deeper teretz, which is now Remez, and at the end of the sicha, he gives you Chassidus. It's Torah Achas. It's one Torah. And it completes itself. They complement one another. So when you have on one level an understanding which is satisfactory, sufficient, you go to a deeper level, you have brand new questions. You go to a deeper level, brand new questions. So like I said, there's many sichas of the Rebbe in this spirit. When the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe is writing a Sefer of Musar. Right? The Sefer of Avodas Hashem. The Tanya is not a philosophy book. It's not a book of mysticism. The Tanya is a book of service. The Tanya teaches how a Yid is supposed to serve the Eibusher. That's really what the Tanya is about. Bemis. The Tanya is a Sefer of Yiras Hashem. It's teaching how to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the point of Sefer Tanya Kaddish. But it's a Sefer of Musar which is based on Pnimiyus HaTorah. In other words, the criteria, the framework, the foundation of this Sefer is understanding of things on a level of Pnimiyus, level of Kabbalah, on a level of Chassidus. The Rebbe mentions in the first page a sefer called Shara Kedusha, Laharachav, which is a sefer from the Reb Chaim Vital, which is avodah. How do you serve the Eibishter and things like that. So the Rebbe wrote a sefer of Musar based on Seid. When it comes to the primary person or issue in this sefer, which is the Beinani, the Alter Rebbe's direct source is Arayim Mehemna, is a Zeir Pashas Mishpatim, which you can see in the middle of the first page, and the Rebbe confirms this in the Haggadah on the second page. The Tanya is defining Beinani. The first source, the second to the last line of the Haggadah, the first source of Beinani, in other words, the foundation of how the Alter Rebbe came up with his understandings of the definitions of Tzadik Beinani Rosh, around which the entire Sefer Tanya Kadisha revolves, is Mazeir. But the Alter Rebbe Dafke starts with Nigla. That's how the Tanya was designed. He starts off with a series of Gemaras, and he presents you with the Nigla, with the Gemara definitions of Tzadik Beinani Rasha, and he uses the Gemara itself to bring you from the Nigla to the Nista. In other words, Alter Rebbe could have started the Tanya say Isa B'Rayim Mehem Pashas Mishpat, because that's really where he's going. Once you get past the first page, he doesn't really talk Nigla. Chachafilu later on, all of the questions he asks on this page, Alter Rebbe feels obligated to answer. Perek Yud Gimel and Perek Yud Daled, chapters 13 and 14, Alter Rebbe answering to some extent the questions that he asked from the Gemaras on the first page of the Tanya. Alter Rebbe could have started with Ayman, he didn't do that. He dafke started with Nigla, and with the Nigla definitions of Tzadik Beinani Rasha, and use the Gemara itself and the unanswerable questions on the Nigla level as a key to a door that says you have to go deeper, because the Gemara, by its own definition, is unsatisfactory. In other words, the Rebbe shows you how in Gemara you're going to come away with unanswerable questions that you cannot be resolved unless you go deeper. Let's go to the Madrega of Pnimius. You understand the Rabbi wrote to Tanya. So let's now start. The Sefer Tanya Kadisha, Tanya, B'Sefer Gimel Gemara, it's a Braise. In the beginning, in the end of the third Perek of Masechta Nida, this is of course the Gemara is describing what happens to a neshama from the time it's conceived until the neshama is born and comes out into this world. V'chuli, v'chuli, v'chuli. Right? Everybody knows, right? That they make all kinds of decisions about this neshama, what it's going to be. And then it sits 9 months in its mother's rechem, and it's near Dolak al-Reshe, Melam Dveis Kalatera Kula, Piv, Sosum, Tabure, Pasuach. The only reason I know this Gemara is I heard the Rebbe say it. I learned Masechta Nida many times, but the Gemaras that I heard from the Rebbe once, you never forget. You heard Gemara, because when the Rebbe said a Gemara, it came from his neshama, so it went into your Gemara, neshama. So part of that Gemara is this also. The Gemara is describing a neshama, how it comes out of Gan Eden, and how it goes into the guf, and all kinds of details. And one of the details in that Braise is Mashbiyah may say, the neshama is made to swear to tzaddik v'al tirosh, that you're going to be righteous, you're going to be a tzaddik, v'al tirosha, you're not going to be evil. And the Braise continues, v'afilu kol olam kulin, even if the whole olam, the whole world, tell you, tzaddik atah, you are a tzaddik, hayei beinecha karasha, you should construe yourself, you should visualize, you should imagine yourself as a rosh. So in these words, you got a contradiction. Why? You tell the neshama to tzaddik v'al tirosha, and in the same breath you say, hayei beinecha karasha. Be righteous and don't be evil. The whole world tells you you're in fact righteous. Don't believe them. You're a Rosh. So the Alter Rebbe now quotes this Braise again, which is his Nigla de Teda, and he asks a question. It says in Pirkei Avos, a person is not allowed to see himself as evil. A person who sees himself as evil has no opportunity to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu for logical and obvious psychological reasons. A person who sees himself as bad cannot achieve anything. So, al tirasha b'fnei atzmacha, do not construe yourself as evil. So the question, of course, is, how could the Braise say, Yehei b'necha karasha, you should imagine as being a rasha, as the Sheit in Pirkei Avos, al tirasha b'fnei atzmacha. V'gam, on the other hand, if you're going to follow the Braise Masechta Nida rather than the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos and construe yourself as evil, you're going to be very embittered, and you're going to fall into a depression, and you will no longer be able to serve the Eibishter with joy and gladness of heart. So first of all, the Rebbe says the Braise is against the Mishnah. Second of all, if you listen to the Braise, it's going to destroy you. And in the destructive nature of seeing yourself as evil, there's two madregas. The first madrega is that you feel terrible. What's worse than feeling terrible? Not caring at all. If a person, you don't become embittered, in other words, you've gone past feeling bad, so then you come to the next step. You achieve kalos, lightheadedness, God forbid. In other words, callousness, indifference, apathy. I don't care about anything. So the Braise Masechta Nida, first of all, contradicts itself by first saying you should be a tzaddik, and then saying imagine yourself being a rasha. And then the Rebbe asks, what about the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says you should not see yourself as a rasha, which is a question. And then, if you're going to not listen to the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos and instead follow the Braise Masechta Nida, either you're going to get depressed or you're going to become indifferent. So the Alter Rebbe says, to answer this question, to explain this Braise, we have to give a Hagdama. We find in the Gemara 5 divisions. Tzaddik v'tevlei, a tzaddik who has it good. Tzaddik v'ralei, a tzaddik who has it bad. Rasha v'tevlei, a rasha who has it good. Rasha v'ralei, a rasha who has it bad. Ubeinani, an intermediate person. So on this classic form of tzaddik v'tevlei, tzaddik v'ralei, and rasha v'tevlei, and rasha v'ralei, it says in the Gemara, Tzaddik v'tevle, what does it mean a tzaddik who has it good? Tzaddik gomer, perfect tzaddik. Tzaddik v'rale, what does it mean a tzaddik who has it bad? Tzaddik she'enei gomer, a tzaddik who's imperfect. Stop. Atkan. We're stopping right here. You see the next words? The next words, this is the introduction to the Sayyid. So we're going to pause. Now understand this. How many times in Shas do you have the word tzaddik b'nei in Russia? How many times? In the Gemara? Hundreds? For sure. Thousands? Very likely. The Gemara tells you how to keep Shabbos and how to keep kosher, to do mitzvahs, but the Gemara also talks to you about being a Yid and serving the Eibishter, especially in Masechta Yuma, we have all the halachas of tshuva. The words tzaddik b'nei Rasha are commonplace. They're all over the Shas. For all kinds of reasons, you see the word tzaddik b'nei Rasha. And of course, if it's in the Gemara, it's going to be in Rambam. So you have it in Rambam, Lubavitcher's no episode of Rambam. In Hilchis Tshuva, I think chapter 4, where the Rambam defines tzaddik, beinoni, and rasha. So understand this. We don't know how many times in Shas you have the word tzaddik and how many times you have the word beinoni, how many times you have the word rasha, but it's hundreds of times, certainly. As a standard understanding of tzaddik and beinoni and rasha. In other words, in most cases, when you learn the Gemara bepashtus, learn the Gemara on a nigla level, how would we define the word tzaddik? How would we define the word rasha? And how would we define the word beinoni? In nigla deteda. So the Rambam says it in very simple words. The Rambam in Hilchas Tshuva tells you what it is. And these are the simple definitions. Tzaddik, beinoni, rasha are legal terms. They're legal terms. They have to do with judgment. Like it says in the next page in the Tanya, Nidin Acherub. There's a court case, and the court case does not judge you action by action by action, because otherwise you'd all be losers. The court case takes an assessment of the totality, the package, the mensch. What have you done in your life? And a tzaddik is judged, a person is judged by the majority of his actions. If most of his actions are good, you call it tzaddik. Me'acha shezeicha b'din, because he wins his case. A rasha is somebody who loses his case because he's the opposite of chus, he's more than 50% of evil, and a beinoni is on the fence. Talon, beinoni has to wait and hang until somebody or something or whatever fixes his situation. So the standard definitions of tzaddik and beinoni and rasha are ones of judgment. You come into a court of law, we're not going to strip you apart action by action and deed by deed. We're going to take the totality of your life and we're going to look at it as a whole, and you're either going to be a good person or a bad person or an on the fencer. A tzaddik means most of your actions are good, so you're considered a good person. A rasha means someone whose most of his actions are evil, so he's considered a bad person. And a beinoni is a person whose actions are divided 50-50, so he's considered an average person. Those are the standard definitions in Igla. In most places in Shas, that's what the words mean. When you come across the word tzaddik and rasha and beinoni and chazal, that is the normal understanding of these phrases. Okay? And that's what the Rambam brings them. The tzaddik, beinoni, rasha are legal terms. They're defining a person based on his judgment. And a tzaddik is someone who's more than 50% good. A rasha is someone who's more than 50% bad. And a beinoni is in the middle. And then the Rambam gets a little bit complicated based on Mamari Chazal, that you have 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 4 leeway. In other words, even if you're 50% good and 50% evil and one more Aveda, they give you 1. Then they give you 2. And then they give you 3, depending on the Aveda. So a little bit, the scale is it's like you go to the bakery, they have to give you an extra ounce. You get in the judgment a little extra. So if you're mamish 50-50, your scale is tipped on the side of good. Because you get 1, like I said, there's different psukim and gemaras that explain 1 or 2 or 3, I don't know what word you want to use, leverage Avedis, that if you're mamish 50-50, so you're still considered a tzaddik, even if you have 1 more than 50%, and so on and so on. This is how the Gemara explains it, this is how the Rambam explains it. This is the tzaddik, beinoni, rasha, fartik. This is true every year. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we're judged for the whole year. This is true in the lifetime, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, along with these terms of tzaddik, beinoni, rasha, we have more complicated terms. Tzaddik v'tevle and tzaddik v'rali. We now know that tzaddik means a person whose judgment is favorable. We now know that a rasha means a person whose judgment is favorable. What's the taich tzaddik v'tevle? What's the taich tzaddik v'rali? So I remember learning Tanya from my Malamed a long, long time ago. My first Tanya teacher was Rabbi Yossi Goldstein, Shalom. And the first Pedic he managed to teach us. A tzaddik was to em is good. That's the translation of the words. A tzaddik who has it good. Begashmias, materially. Tzaddik v'toiv loy. Tzaddik means he's a righteous person. Toiv loy means that this righteous person has good in his life. Begashmias, material good. Tzaddik v'ra loy means a tzaddik who has evil in his life. Rasha v'toiv loy means a rasha who has good materially in his life. And a rasha v'ra loy means a rasha who has evil in his life. And of course, we know one of the classic questions of Torah, one of the classic theological questions of Torah, which is the basis for the Sefer Eiv, is tzaddik v'ra loy, question mark. If he's a tzaddik, why does he suffer? The whole Sefer of Eiv, the whole book of Job, is this question. Why does the Eibush make righteous people suffer? That's the story of Eiv. Tzaddik v'ra loy, vos leiten, why is he suffering? So the Gemara has this question too. If tzaddik means that ma'ach hashazeicha b'din, you're more than 50% good, so you're righteous, so why are you tevlei? Why does one tzaddik have it good and one tzaddik have it bad? If rasha means more than 50% evil, so why does one rasha have it good and one rasha bad? And the teretz is tzaddik v'tevlei, tzaddik gomer. Tzaddik v'ralei, tzaddik she'eni gomer. What does that mean? If you're a tzaddik, but it's not more than 50% good, it's 100% good. So then it's v'tevlei. If you're a tzaddik gomer, not only are you winning your case, because more than 50% of your actions are good, but all of your actions are good, 100% of your actions are good, then it's v'tevlei. Begashmis, it's good. If you have one Aveda, so there's a pasuk in Chumash someplace where the Eibishter says, there's two psukim. One is that the Eibishter gives Rishoyim good in this world to punish them in the other world. And the other pasuk is the Eibishter gives challenge to tzaddikim in this world, so that when they come to the other world, they should have it good. So tzaddik v'ra'alei is tzaddik she'eni gomer. Since you're a tzaddik, so your case is favorable, you're a winner. But v'eini gomer, you're not a perfect tzaddik because some of your actions are not good. So the Eibishter arranges ra'aloi, it should be begashmi, it's difficult, so that you should cleanse, you should be purged from whatever it is in you in this world, so when you come to the other world, so then you have only tev. That's the taich. That's the taich, right? It's a question and an answer. Why is a tzaddik v'ra'alei? Why is a tzaddik suffering? And the answer is because he's einei gomer. He's a tzaddik. And again, the definition of tzaddik means he's judged favorably because he has more than 50% good. But since he has a minority of evil, the Eibishter is punishing for his evil in this world, so that in the next world he should have all good, and that's why it's v'ra'alei. And the same is true bein rasha v'tevlei. Mishalim, this pasuk I remember, the other pasuk I remember, Mishalim el seinav al ponav la'avide. Hashem gives a rasha whatever he's entitled to in this world, and in the other world his judgment is entirely evil. So what's the type of rasha v'tevlei? Why do you see a rasha that seems to be succeeding? And then it says rasha she'eni gomer. If he had only Averis, he would have Ra in this world and in the next world. But because he has some mitzvahs, but he's judged disfavorably, the majority of his actions are negative, so the Eibishter gives him schar, gashmi in this world, material bracha in this world, to compensate for the minority of mitzvahs that he has, so that the next world he gets a clean slate, Rahman al-Islam, Shalei l'teva. That's the taich. So you have three levels to this conversation. The first level of this conversation is the definition of tzaddik bein rasha. The second level of this conversation is tzaddik v'tevlei, tzaddik v'ra'alei, rasha v'tevlei, rasha v'ra'alei. And the third level of conversation is that we add in explaining tzaddik v'tevlei, tzaddik gomer. We add in explaining tzaddik v'ra'alei the word tzaddik she'enei gomer. We add in explaining rasha v'tevlei, rasha she'enei gomer. And we add in the words rasha v'ra'alei, rasha gomer. You get it? All of this is simple niggle. This is standard fare, zeh state in Gemara. Now again, is this true in every single place in Shas? No. Because if it was true in every single place in Shas, we wouldn't have our window from niggle to nistir. And the way the Tanya is designed, he's going to show you from niggle, rayas to what says in Chassidus. But the Rubam Kekulam, the vast majority of places in Gemara, when they talk tzaddik, bein rasha, these are the definitions. Okay? So the Rebbe continues, I'm not going to keep you much longer. What steht in Zayah? The Zayah says something different. The problem with the Zayah is very, very subtle. It's very, very subtle. In Zayah it says, Pirush tzaddik v'ra'alei, the meaning of a tzaddik who has evil, shaharash aboy, the evil inside him, kafaf l'tei v'chulu, is leading towards good, etc. What's the pshat in these words? How are we defining tzaddik v'ralei. How are we defining tzaddik v'ralei? We're defining tzaddik, that's his judgment. Ralei, that's his predicament. Right? His judge is a good person. Ralei means he's suffering. And you're wondering, why is a good person suffering? And the answer is, because he has some evil, and the Eibush is cleaning it out, so a perfect slate. But the Zohar says something very different. Tzaddik v'ralei doesn't mean a tzaddik who suffers. Tzaddik v'ralei means a tzaddik who has evil, and it's kafuf, it's hidden, you don't see it. So what the Zohar says, and what the Gemara says, are in direct conflict. Because the way the Gemara and you can go through all four. The Alter Rebbe quotes this lashon, because this is the lashon that I am mehemne. But this is true of tzaddik v'tevlin, tzaddik v'ralei, rasha v'tevlin, rasha v'ralei. Right? The Nigle says v'tevlei is what his physical condition is, how he's living his physical life. The Zohar says tzaddik v'ralei is not about his physical life. Tzaddik v'ralei is what's going on inside him. He's a righteous man. Inside him is Ra, and you don't see it. That's right. Tzaddik v'ralei is a righteous man who not is suffering and the outside, who everybody sees it. Fakir. There's evil in him, and the evil in him is kaf of a bottle of tape. It's nullified to the good, so you don't even see it, but it's there. And therefore, he's tzaddik v'ralei. You follow? Verstehst? So we immediately run into a conflict between what says in the Gemara and what says in the Zohar. So in order to resolve this conflict, what says in the Gemara and what says in the Zohar, the Alter Rebbe brings noch a Gemara. But this Gemara is a very supporting the Zohar, right? Zogt weiter über Gemara Seif Peirik Tes de Brachas. Then there's the Gemara in Brachas. And the Gemara says as follows: Tzadikim, what's a tzaddik? Yetzetev Sheif Tanchulu. He's judged only by his Yetzetev. And then the Gemara brings a pasuk. Alter Rebbe doesn't quote the psukim. That's why he puts on all the v'chulus. A tzaddik is judged only by his Yetzetev. Now, what does that sound like? It doesn't sound like a person who comes into a court of law and they don't dissect every individual action, right? That's the best news you can get. They're not going to look at you one action at a time. They're going to look at the package, the ganze Mensch. And a tzaddik means package is, quote, basically and, quote, good. He's judged only by the Yetzer Tov. Reshayim, Yetzer Hara, Sheift, and Reshayim are judged only by the Yetzer Hara. Beinanim zeva zeh Sheift and Chulia. Beinim are judged by the both the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. And one of these brings the pasuk Ki Yamid Limin Evyan Mishem Sheftei Nafshe. There's a fight between two judges, Sheftei Nafshe, and the Eibush that helps the Yamin should defeat the smell because you have both judges. Okay, now what these words mean at this moment we don't know, but what we want to finish today's class is with the next words. Amar Rabbi. So Rabbi says Kegeina no. For example, I Beinani. So what is this? This is our third source, right? We had the Gemara in Nida, we forgot about that already. One is already on the shelf. Then we have Isa b'Gemara, Betzina b'Gemara. The Alter Rebbe doesn't say we're in Shas because it's all over the Shas. Tzadik Beini Rash is all over Shas, right? So he brought us first Betzina b'Gemara, then he brought us a Zohar, one line, Raya Mehemne, to resolve the conflict between the Gemaras all over Shas and this Raya Mehemne. He brings another Gemara. That this Gemara seems to put what all the other Gemaras in the whole Shas are saying into one certainty, into a state of question. Rabbi says, for example, I Beinani. Who was Rabbi Nachmani? You know what Rabbi Nachmani was? The Gemara said Rabbi Nachmani, like David HaMelech. The Samachmem, the Yitzhahara, the Malach HaMavis came to kill him. And he couldn't take his life because they put him in Yossi. The whole story, Aganse Meise, Havatam Ba'arbet. Rabbi Nachmani died saying the word Tahir. But in order for him to pass away, there had to be an interruption of his learning. He passed in the Machlaikis in the Kuchabrichu, with Sifta Dirikiya. Right, you know this. It was a Machlaikis in the Sifta Dirikiya and Kuchabrichu, whatever that means. Kuchabrichu means the Hebishter in simple Yiddish. And the Sifta Dirikiya Machlaikis. And the man Neichach, Rabbi Nachmani. So Rabbi Nachmani paskin, and he said the word Ta'ir, and he passed away. But in order for that to work, he had to have interruption of his learning. And the whole story in the Gemara, how he was interrupted. And Rabbi Nachmani, who's paskening, Yochad ben Agoyim v'Olos, who's paskening Machlekes, be Mesifta the Bricha Kochabricha, which of course makes no sense. And he can only pass away because the Satan has to trick, the Machamavs has to trick him into be stopping to learn for a second, so we can take his neshama. So Amalei Abayas says to Rabbi, excuse me Rebbe, Lei Shovak Mar Chaya Lechol Beria v'Chulu. You leave no room for anybody to live. And there's a lot of explanations for this. The simple one is because if you're a Benyani, we're all Rishoyim, and that's bad. And the deeper explanation is that every generation has to have at least one tzaddik, and if you're a tzaddik in our generation, it's you, and if you're not a tzaddik, the world can't have a kiyum. Here's a Gemara that brings into question all the Gemaras in the whole Shas. But this Gemara, which brings into question the whole Shas, also begins to help us understand the difference between the Matzinu Gemara, the classic Nigle of Tzaddik Beinani Rasha, Tzaddik V'Tevet, Tzaddik V'Rali, Rasha V'Tevet, Rali Beinani, Tzaddik Goma, Tzaddik She'eni Goma, Rasha Goma, and so on and so forth, and the Zayar. Okay, we'll continue next week in Mitzvah Shem.